Good morning. Welcome to 1111 Downtown. I'm Tom McDermott, pastor of this 1111 community, one of the associate pastors at First United Methodist Church. So glad you're with us. Take a moment, fill in the spaces to the side there. If you're watching on Facebook or on YouTube Premiere, give us a comment. Let us know that you're there as well. And if you're visiting with us for the first time, let me know, because I've got a gift for you. Just fill in a name and an address and we'll pass something along your way. But I'm really glad you decided to check us out this morning. A couple of things that are coming up that I want you to know about. First of all is Reverend Linda McDermott, who will be joining me shortly in our conversation. She's doing another book club. The book is called Gilead. Pulitzer Prize book, fascinating book, and it's on the information there on the screen, but I believe it's July 9th. Go to the website, sign up for that. Then Daryl Parker and I are doing something different now on Monday nights. We're just going to start it. This will be the first Monday night. We're going to do it for Monday nights, 7 o'clock. We're calling it Crafting Difficult Conversations, and really just a time for us to sort of navigate this time we're in, COVID time, racial relations and reconciliation. Really a way to sort of think through conversations we have with others as well. And so hope you'll join us for that, called Crafting Difficult Conversations. So glad to have you with us. Hope that you are doing well, and I know you'll find an inspiring time. Brad Thompson's got some great music coming up. A poem with Maya Angelou by Maya Angelou. Linda and I are talking about a fascinating look at a very familiar old parable, but a brand new way of looking at the whole thing that really fits with where we are right now. And then finally, there'll be a guest artist, Joseph Veazey, friend of Brad Thompson's, and he's invited him. First time for us to have him, so I can't wait. It's going to be exciting, and I know you'll find it inspiring as well. So glad that you're with us. Look forward to seeing you sometime in the near future, but I hope you're well, and we'll be with you in just a minute.
Poverty still run by, sold out to the merchant ships. Minutes after they took I from the bottomless pit, but my hand it was made strong by the end of the Almighty. We're forward in this generation triumphantly. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? 'Cause all I've ever had, redemption songs, redemption songs, redemption songs. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. Now that ourselves can free our minds, have no fear of atomic energy, 'cause none of them can stop the time. Oh, how long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Ooh, some say that it's just a part of it. We've got to fulfill the book. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? 'Cause all I've ever had, redemption songs, redemption songs. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. Now that ourselves can free our minds, have no fear for atomic energy, 'cause none of them can stop the time. Oh, how long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Some say that it's just a part of it. We've got to fulfill the book. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? 'Cause all I've ever had, redemption song. 'Cause all I've ever had, redemption song. Redemption song.
Hi, everybody. Our prayer today is actually a portion of a poem by Maya Angelou, A Brave and Startling Truth. We, this people, on this small and drifting planet, whose hands can strike with such abandon that in a twinkling life is sapped from the living, yet those same hands can touch with such healing, irresistible tenderness that the haughty neck is happy to bow and the proud back is glad to bend. Out of such chaos, of such contradiction, we learn that we are neither devils nor divines. When we come to it, we, this people, on this wayward floating body created on this earth, of this earth, have the power to fashion for this earth a climate where every man and every woman can live freely without sanctimonious piety, without crippling fear. When we come to it, we must confess that we are the possible. We are the miraculous, the true wonders of this world. That is, when, and only when, we come to it. Maya Angelou.
Hey, good morning, everyone. It's good to be with you this morning, and good to have you again with us. We're so glad you joined us this morning. I'm glad to be here with my wife, Reverend Linda McDermott, who was not with us last week. I was solo last week.
You did a good job.
Thank you very much.
But I'm glad to be back.
It's good to have you. It's good to have you back. We're going to have some fun talking about this and get into some interesting ideas. I'm going to just tell us where we're going to go real quick, like I did last week. Parable of the Good Samaritan will be the first thing. And then Larry, Moe, and Curly. That'll be interesting. Charity is a good thing, but why now, white people? We always forget about the lizard in the brain. The scary question. Alice Walker and the Places You'll Go should scare you. How to be facile.
Ooh, that's your new favorite word.
Facile. I'm trying to use that as often as I can. Facile. And then I'm going to have my favorite poem I'm going to quote.
Okay.
And then we'll close out with 4 things to think about with that poem. All right. So we're going to talk about the parable of the Good Samaritan and some interesting things on it that I didn't, a new perspective on it. Take it away.
Okay, I'll tell the story instead of reading it. In Jesus' time, however, it wasn't referred to as the parable of the Good Samaritan. It was the parable of the man in the ditch.
Wow.
So it's been changed over the years.
Oh, yeah.
But the parable of the man in the ditch. A lawyer comes up to Jesus and asks him, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus says, "Well, what do the law and the prophets say?" And the lawyer answers him and says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, and your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus says, "Good answer. Do it." But the lawyer wants to kind of trap him.
Yeah.
And so he said, "So specifically, Jesus, who is my neighbor?" And Jesus tells him a story, which as soon as Jesus starts telling you a story or a parable, somebody's going to get indicted.
Right. You're not going to get the answer you wanted.
Exactly.
Ever.
So
That's
here's
why it's
the
called
parable.
disruption.
It's going to disrupt. It's going to upset. So he says, a man was walking down the road from Jerusalem to Jericho, which is a dangerous road, and he's attacked by robbers who beat him and take all of his things and leave him for half dead along the side of the road. So along comes a priest, and he goes around the other side of the road and keeps going. Along comes a Levite. He goes down the road and passes by. And a third man comes, and this man is a Samaritan, who are hated.
Right.
They hate each other.
Right.
They hate each other.
That's the gut punch right there.
Yes. But the Samaritan is moved by compassion, it says. And he goes and he tends to the wounds of this man. He puts him on his donkey, takes him into town, tells the people there, I'll pay for all of his expenses. When I come back, if there's more, I'll give you more. And so Jesus then looks at the neighbor, the lawyer, and says, so who then was the neighbor to this man? And the lawyer says, the one who showed compassion.
Yeah. It says, in fact, it says, who became the neighbor?
Who became the neighbor.
Yeah. So.
But I think the interesting thing there is he can't even say the guy's, he can't even
that's right.
say
He can't even
Samaritan.
say, yeah.
It's
right.
still
That's
such a
right.
bitter word
Right.
for any Israelite.
And you've been doing some reading with Amy Jo Levine, the New Testament scholar who's Jewish and teaches that at Vanderbilt.
Yeah.
And so
Lots
share
of
some of
good
those interesting insights there.
Well, first of all, she talks about this rule of three, and you probably know this from stories.
Well, yeah, all of our folklore, I mean, I was a storyteller, all folklore had it. My favorite thing, of course, is jokes, right? The jokes are like three people walk into a bar, and it's always the third one that you're going like, okay, what's going to be different
the
here?
1-2 punch.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what Jesus does here.
Yeah.
So it's the rule of three. So what Amy Jo Levine does, which she's very funny, but she talks about this rule of three when you expect the third thing. So if I were to say to you, Larry, Moe, and
Curly. Oh, this is a participatory moment.
they're thinking
They're
Curly,
yeah,
if they're,
Curly.
especially if they're a certain age, or Father, Son, and
Holy Spirit.
we know the answer. In Jesus' time, if you said priest, Levite, the third thing would be Israelite. Priest, Levite, Israelite. Priest, Levite, Israelite. So Jesus says priest, Levite, Samaritan, which she says is the same as if you said Larry, Moe, Hitler.
Well, and Larry, Moe, and Curly are
Jewish,
right? So that's just the worst thing you could put in there.
Or Father, Son, Satan.
Yeah.
Priest, Levite, Samaritan. It's the same impact.
It's just an insult. Yeah.
So there's the punch.
It's not even illogical. It's a gut punch.
It is a gut punch.
Why would you say that? Why would you even bring that up?
Well, that's what parables do.
Yeah.
The second thing that I think is important here is we kind of alluded to it, but at the end of the parable, Jesus reverses the lawyer's question or puts it in a different context. The lawyer said, who is my neighbor? In fact, so narrow it down. What do I need to do? And at the end, Jesus said,
yes, that's
who
right.
was the neighbor to the man? Who became the neighbor?
Yeah.
The one who showed compassion.
Right.
So, little twist there. And then the third thing.
Important nuance. Yeah.
Right. Is something that Martin Luther King Jr. said. And he was talking about compassion. And, you know, people try to give excuses for why the priest or the Levite might have passed by, but we don't know. And Martin Luther King said maybe they were afraid. There was reason to be afraid. But he said that the first two asked the question, what's going to happen to me if I stop and help?
Yeah.
But the Samaritan asked the question, what's going to happen to him if I don't?
And that's that's powerful because, you know, I've always heard it, well, the first two didn't do it because of ritual laws or because of this sort of thing. But Martin Luther King, he makes the distinction that it's how they approach the moment from themselves, thinking of themselves, or thinking of the other first, which is what shalom is all about. That's that kingdom of God. The path towards shalom is looking for ways to create right balance, right relationship, and harmony. And that's what is so powerful about what we're called to do. So when he says it's the enemy that's doing it, it's just the enemy is the one who could save you. You know, we're the ones in the ditch.
Yes.
And I've always had trouble with this because I've always thought of it as simply being about charity, because you see so many charities named after the Samaritan.
Good Samaritan.
Imagine if our charities were named after our enemies. That's kind of what Jesus would do, I think. I think he would come in there and do that, you know?
It's innocuous now to say the Good Samaritan.
Oh, it's just almost cliche.
But
you know?
it was
it's empty
offensive
almost.
then.
Well, so the thing that got me thinking about this even more is what's going on right now, right? Where we are right now, 3 weeks into protest after the murder of George
Black Lives
Floyd,
Matter.
and the just this outpouring support for Black Lives Matter, even in our little town of Petoskey here, you know, crowd out there. And so we started listening to this podcast, Code Switch. And it's an NPR podcast run by hosted by Gene Demby and Shireen Meraji. She's in Iranian descent and he's black, and they had this burst of support and followers in the last
Yeah, they
couple
were
of weeks.
not really very well known
They
as
were
a
just
podcast.
one of many podcasts on NPR.
And then they go to number one.
they go to number one on the iTunes podcast,
Yeah.
and then Oprah Winfrey is mentioning her in them in her magazine, and they're having 1,000 new subscribers, most of which were white.
Right,
they said,
which they hadn't had before.
And so they start asking, why now, white people?
Yeah.
Why now? Shireen says to Jean, she says, we were there when
Ferguson.
Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, and when Freddie Gray was killed in Baltimore, and then Eric Garner, whose situation was eerily similar,
Right.
just 6 years earlier, but eerily similar
So
to what
why?
happened to Floyd.
What was
George
the
Floyd.
catalyst here?
Right. Why now, white people? And so he actually asked them. He just kind of asked them, okay.
What's his name? Denby?
Yeah. Gene, he sort of tweets out there and he says, okay, I just need to know from you, white people, just the white people, what's going on?
Yeah.
You weren't there at these other things. Why now?
Why now?
And so there were three major themes that came out of this, and a lot of people responded, like 100 or 200 people. The first one was simply, there were more white people responding. It was sort of like my circle of friends, which were mostly white, for all of them, were now responding, and I felt the impetus and the permission to respond as well.
Right.
I mean, it's sort of like they would say we're embarrassed, we're ashamed, but now with everyone responding, we felt like we should jump in.
After a certain number of people began to break
Well,
the ice,
and in 3 weeks'
it was
time.
easier to become involved.
In 3 weeks' time, changes across the board are
wow,
happening.
yeah.
I mean, changes across every culture, every community, changing their and brands, NFL, which
Right.
condemned Colin Kaepernick and
a year ago?
and backed his being fired for taking a knee, and now they're apologizing. They were wrong.
Good for
right?
them.
Right.
Good for
But
them.
again, why now?
And
You
what
know?
about, like,
And
NASCAR?
NASCAR, right? NASCAR. No more flags. No more Confederate flags. What's
Good for
NASCAR going
them.
to look like?
Yeah.
Um,
Finally.
But all of these changes, the statues, the things like that are gonna be falling. I mean, all of this is pointing to some kind of sudden movement, and so the question is
It's
why?
an awakening
So,
toward truth.
yeah, but again, why? Why now?
Yeah, why
That's
now?
still the question. So what was the second category? The second
Wasn't it? Just the whole divisiveness of our country.
Right.
Before all this, before COVID, before George Floyd, just last year before, our country we felt like
We've
our
been a
country was
divided
very
nation.
divided. We didn't know who to trust. We didn't know what news to trust, what political leaders to trust. Even when the pandemic began, we didn't know which doctors to trust. Do we wear masks? Do we not wear masks?
and there was a lot of anxiety.
lots of anxiety.
Because people dying, loved ones dying, losing jobs. And then that led to the third thing,
Well, that's related to the pandemic.
which was the pandemic. The third thing that they said was really influential was the pandemic. I think what they identified is that they really hadn't been paying attention because they'd been in their white circles. They'd been in their white places. You know, they quoted us.
admitted it.
They admitted it. And they quoted a study, Jean and Shireen quoted a study.
Fascinating.
75% of white people said they didn't have a friend of color.
I'm really wondering if that's true for
Yeah.
those of you who are listening.
I mean,
You might have a colleague or an associate,
Right.
but a friend,
Right.
a black friend,
Right.
if you're white.
yeah, or even a friend, just a close friend of color. Even
Personal
they were
color.
saying a personal friend of color. 75% did not have that. So now think about where they've been. They in 3 months, and we've been talking about this from the beginning of this series, right? Disruption was all about: is this an invitation this time away? We hadn't been
Are
thinking
we going to
about race.
let this break us open
We weren't
to
thinking
something
about
new?
racism. We weren't thinking about Black Lives Matter as the thing. We were just thinking that the COVID reality is going to offer us a chance for change.
So we were kind of, what was this change going to be? What
Right.
was going to be evoked
And with
in
white
us?
people hanging around, mostly with white people, now they were at home.
Okay.
Now they were by themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and they had 3 months of seeing the world through
social media.
Through social media, which led to this research that they talked to a psychologist, Nicole Fisher.
Well, can I say something that
yeah.
kind of struck me there?
Yeah,
The narrower our social life got, the bigger our world got.
yes.
The more we were quarantined,
'cause
the more
we're-
we were forced to see a bigger
Because
picture.
once again, we were paying attention.
Wow.
We were paying
Yeah.
attention.
Wow.
We had
Who
a
would have thought
chance
that?
to challenge our own narratives,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Right?
So, okay, sorry I interrupted you.
Yeah, but that's okay. So Nicole Fisher, psychologist who's an advisor, policy advisor with the White House.
Okay.
And she writes for Forbes magazine. She's just a brilliant social psychologist, and she did this article, which is, I think it's going to come up on the screen, but she did this article on back in March, the beginning of March. So she predicted there would be protests. Now, Black Lives Matter, George Floyd had
That
not
hadn't
been
happened
killed
yet.
yet. And
She's just saying with
she's
all
just
this
saying,
tension,
we're
something's
gonna be
going
in
to
lockdown
explode.
and something's going to explode because it's just neurology. And so she predicted this
Something's
back
gonna
in
be-
March. You remember March? March was back when you didn't have a birthday, and
Right.
and that shut down. Your party was actually closed. They closed the place. So I owe you 2 birthdays next year.
You heard
just
that.
a side thought here.
You heard that.
But so Nicole Fisher said, what happens when we go into lockdown? Our lizard brain takes over, right?
That reptilian
we
brain.
always forget about that very primitive part of our brain. We literally forget that that's what
It's our
drives
knee-jerk
us.
reaction.
It drives police. It drives protesters. It drives us white people when we're stuck at home. You know, that primitive brain, it's flight or fight. The adrenaline, the cortisol, the stress hormones start kicking in, and she's saying it's inevitable. It's going to pop. What we don't realize is that white communities don't normally have that. We normally have our comfort zones and our familiarity, and we love status quo.
Well, everybody.
Everybody does. But status
we
quo
default to the
for
status
communities
quo.
of color is always
It's painful.
at the peak. That lizard brain is always in motion because it's scary,
Being
it's
provoked.
threatening, it's being provoked
all the time.
We don't see that. So now we've had this chance and we've come out and we've had this reaction, and that's a big part of what she says is going on, and that caused Jean and Shireen to ask a very scary, difficult question. Is that the only reason?
Oh.
Right? I mean, because what Nicole Fisher says is she says,
Are we going to lose this momentum?
are we going to lose this momentum? It's great, the changes that have been
Yeah,
happening.
profound.
Sweeping changes, which is great. But it's one problem in the dysfunctional system. One symptomatic problem, which is the police brutality and the abuse. And we're starting to look at white privilege. But is that fire, is that fervor going to continue when we're all back to normal?
Getting underneath what's this system that's oppressive, and that kind of brings us back to the parable.
It really
doesn't
does.
Yeah.
It does because what Jesus was saying was he was literally going into the comfort places, and he was saying, okay, now I'm going to throw this upside down.
I'm going to what's the saying? I'm going to comfort the afflicted and afflict
I'm
the
going to afflict
comfort.
the comforted. Yeah. And
So-
the comfortable, and that's what he's doing. So this parable is about.
Well, it gets the systemic problem has to do with, do we have an enemy, or who is the enemy? And we want to blame another person, another group of people. That's part of the system that helps us avoid really fixing the problem. Who is our enemy? Well, in Jesus' story, it's the one who saves us.
Yeah, I think you hit on something right there. When we look at, I was listening to James McBride, another author out of New York, who wrote this book called Deacon King Kong. It's a bestseller right now, and it looks at the bodegas and the communities of Lower Bronx and back in the late '60s. And he says we were always dysfunctional. I mean, life is dysfunctional. He says it's chaotic. He said, but we seem to rely on each other. But then things came through. We had this whole emphasis on law and order. It began to kind of clean up the neighborhoods. And what we found is that we saw the worst of us. Somehow, even in a dysfunctional system, left to our own communities, we will rise above. We're more than one-dimensional people. We'll rise above, and that's what his characters in this book do. They all rise above their limit, what we see of them. Like Jesus saying, you've named this Samaritan.
Right.
You've named your enemy. Who told you that? Right?
Yeah, I've always been curious when someone says that person is our enemy, who says? Mm-hmm. Very rarely do I have the experience, and I think a lot of us, of having someone personally do something to me that might make them my enemy. But the word enemy, it's because I've been told they're my enemy or
Right.
taught they were my enemy. What I think, it seems like what you were saying was, can we let our enemy be better? What was it you said
Well,
about the neighborhood?
can we see them more in multidimensionality? Can we see them as more than
that stereotype?
More than that stereotype, and that's the challenge.
And can we allow them to rise above that?
And Jesus would literally tell a story that would say, they're not what you think they are.
Yeah.
And then they've got to sit there and process that. But what Alice Walker writes, because we were reading an article in Yes Magazine about Alice Walker.
It's a great magazine.
It is,
You've
Yes
introduced
Magazine.
me to.
Yes, check that out, as well as Code Switch. But she says that in order to have empathy, which is what's required before we can understand our enemy as something other than, she says in order to have empathy, you first have to understand. And in order to understand, you have to be willing to go to the places that scare you. Now, see, we've done this because other whites are out there, and so now whites are rising to the occasion, and the demand is out there for change. But when things get back to normal, certainly they can't be.
Normal.
Certainly they won't be.
Right.
You know, I want to be optimistic about this, and that the best of us will rise to our better angels of ourselves, you know.
And social media, in some ways, our media has allowed us to go to some of those scary places.
Yes.
They don't scare us when
Yeah.
we're watching it, but at least we've been exposed more than perhaps we have before.
Right.
And hearing their stories.
Well, that's where that's where this idea of facile came into mind, because she said essentially what Nicole Fisher was saying and what the other hosts were questioning in their podcast, when that is, when all this is over, you know, she says the danger for white people and anyone really, but in this case the white people in this system, is to sort of feel good about improving ourselves. We've learned about white fragility. We've learned about white supremacy. We've learned about racism.
Now.
So we're getting better now. We're feeling better, and so then we kind of go back to just a little bit more enlightened, but
Right.
back to normal. She said facile. We kind of go back to these facile selves, which is just a shell of sort of what we've learned, but not really substantive. In order to get substantive change in ourselves, which is what Jesus was saying when he said, your enemy is the one who saves you. That's substantive change. You are no longer seeing somebody as what you thought they were. Now you're seeing them as your brother or your sister.
Exactly.
Right.
And your life might depend on them.
Now when someone gets pulled over because of their color, their skin color, you've gotten pulled over.
Empathy.
That's empathy, right?
Alice Walker said, without empathy, there is no change. Without empathy, there is no change. And so those getting into people's stories, going into those scary places, getting to really understand the culture and the world
Right.
around us, and those people who may be seen as our enemies or scary,
Yeah.
being empathetic
Empathy is the key.
is going to be the
so,
key
so
to
here's
change.
this is the poem that I read. We'll close up here because we're at 20 and we're going to try to get this in under 25. But she said, I read this poem. This is one of my favorite poets, Rumi, Middle Eastern 17th century mystical poet. And I read this poem and I thought, this is really what this poem is about. So much of his sayings are just powerful. This one is, sit, be still, and listen, for you are drunk, and we're at the edge of the roof. Sit, be still and listen, for you are drunk, and we're at the edge of the roof. I think this says a couple of things that I want to just say, 4 things really quickly. The first thing is the sit. And that's essentially what Alice Walker's saying, and what others have been saying, is that need to be present. The need to be present.
You know, she told that story about being in
Right.
Australia,
Yeah,
and she and a friend really wanted to get into understand the indigenous people. They really wanted to be open to them and be able to interact with them, and so the indigenous people were
They
sitting.
came to this meeting,
They came to a meeting. The people were
sitting out in a field,
and so
in a
they
circle on the ground.
come out and
Yeah.
they sit, but they have chairs. They're sitting in their chairs because that's what we do.
Yeah.
And she said we were just invisible. They didn't see us.
It's like they hadn't even walked up.
They just, it's not even
They weren't
ignoring.
yeah.
They just didn't even
They
see
did
them.
not see.
And she said it occurred to her. They pulled out the chairs, sat on the ground, and suddenly they were part of the group. And they
That's right.
saw
They had entered the
them.
circle now. They
entered
were
the
at
circle.
their place. And that's, I think, what we have to do. When we say sit, it's not simply go off and meditate, which is always fine, but it is literally being present.
Be
sitting.
still.
Imagine we're on this edge of the roof. What do? Well, we got to be present. And then the second thing is, as she said, is he in this poem, he says, "Be still and listen." And I remember I remember being invited to speak at an AME church way back early in my ministry, and I was terrified. I'd done a workshop, and then the next day they said, "You're going to preach at a church," and I said, "Awesome! I've got a sermon."
Because you didn't know.
No, I'd been preaching at this other church in Fort Worth, and I said, "Yeah, I got a sermon from there." A white church, of course. So I'm at an AME church. He tells me that morning, "You're going to be preaching in an AME church, African Methodist Episcopal." And I said, "A black church?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
I don't know how to preach to a black church, and I don't understand."
Right.
And he said, "That's perfect." He said, "That's really where you need to be. You don't understand." But he said, "If you'll be yourself, if you'll be honest and open and not try to say something or impress some, if you'll simply be honest and open, they will carry you the rest of the way." I mean, it just broke. I mean, broke me open, and
they did.
and they did.
Yeah.
And it was a great lunch afterwards, and
But you honored them, and by doing that, they honored you back.
we can't
have that
walk
resistance
into situations
and
in a
pretend we know.
dysfunctional reality. We can't pretend to know who's the problem. We can't pretend to know who's the enemy, because that's what we want to do. That's our brain. Our lizard brain is going to go, "Where's the problem? Who's the problem?" And we point it out, right? In family systems, we point out the problem.
Yeah.
But it's not
The
problem.
identified child.
It's never the problem.
That's right.
And the only way to get to the problem is to be willing to sit, be still, and listen. And that's what Rumi says. Because you're drunk, not ecstatically drunk, like in joy and rapture. You're drunk in the sense that you're poisoned with your own ideas.
Okay, you're drunk because you're poisoned with your own ideas, have clouded your thinking.
Your knowingness, the
Okay.
narratives you've been told, who told you this is your enemy, that kind of
Right,
stuff.
right.
You're drunk with these ideas.
Okay.
So you're not really paying attention, and you're standing on the edge of the roof. We all are. That's what he says. He says, we all are on the edge of the roof, and you're drunk. So you need to be still and listen. And that's the thing.
Oh, okay.
We assume we
Okay.
know what the problem is.
Right.
We've got to be still and
So we're
listen
gonna go
because
fix it.
we're drunk with this knowingness.
Yeah.
So we have to be still and see that there's more of each other than we think in this dysfunctional reality. And that, I think that becomes our hope when we recognize, it's kind of what Martin Luther King would say, is he would say, we recognize that we are all wrapped in this same wonderful robe of destiny.
It's not your fault or my fault. It's the in-between,
It's
like
this
the Martin
systemic-
Buber thing.
but we participate.
It's the systemic
We
thing.
have to recognize how we participate, and we have to be still enough
All members of the system.
and listen enough and begin to see the better side of everybody.
Yeah.
And Martin Luther King says, then once we do that, we become wrapped up in this destiny of what we've called shalom,
Yes.
or what Jesus called the kingdom of God,
Right.
the kingdom of God.
The unity, the peace.
Sit, be still and listen, for you are drunk and we are on the edge of the roof.
We are
Always
on
on the
roof.
edge of the roof. But we get there, when we get there, we make the edge, we walk the edge when we do it together.
Together.
That. With our enemies, who are not our enemies. Okay, that's enough. I'm gonna keep us going here. Listen, it's been good to be with you this morning. It's been good to be with you this morning. It's been good to have you some
It's
good
a good
insights.
parable that we thought we knew, and
right.
we don't.
It's
but
so much more than just charity.
Thanks. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to us kind of think through this parable. This coming up here, we have a new singer that we've invited to be with us. That Brad invited. Joseph Veazey is going to be singing this next song. I've heard it for the
great
first time
things
last
about
week.
him, yeah.
It's called Colors. It's very inspiring. So enjoy, and hope your week is blessed. Hope you find yourself sitting more, listening more, and walking that edge with others that you in a little bit scarier, more uncomfortable places, and realizing that we can walk this edge when we walk it together. Blessings on you. Shalom. We'll see you next time.
Hi.
I woke up to the morning sky first. Baby blue just like we rehearsed. When I get up off this ground, I shake the leaves back down to the brown, 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 till I'm clean. walk where I'd be shaded by the trees, by a meadow of green for about a mile. I'm headed to town, town, town in style, with all my favorite colors, yes sir, all my favorite colors, right on. My sisters and my brothers, see them like no other, all my favorite colors. It's a good day to be, a good day for me, a good day to see my favorite colors, colors. My sisters and my brothers, I see them like no other, all my favorite colors. Now take me to the other side. Little bitty blues butterflies and gray clouds, white walls, the blue skies. We gon' fly, feel alright. We gon' ooh, 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 yeah. It sound like ooh, 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 yeah. The least I can say, I anticipate a homecoming parade as we renegade in the morning light, with all my favorite colors, yes sir.